Welcome to the Theotherapist Podcast, where theologically trained, licensed therapists share health and healing conversations. Join our host, Dr. Trice for conversations about real-life issues from both theological and therapeutic perspectives. Each week, we speak to guiding questions with real-life application, humor, and engaging guests to share meaningful dialogues with our listeners. Let's begin.
Welcome to Season 2 of the Theotherapist Podcast. I am Dr. Trice, the creator and host of the Theotherapist Podcast, and I am so thankful that you are joining today. I am looking so forward to this second season of the podcast. In the first season, we had some great other theotherapists come on to share with us their passion projects, their particular areas that meet at the intersection of theology and psychology. And so this season, we're going to continue the same. I'm going to kick off Season 2 today with a topic that is near and dear to my heart as someone who has worked so closely with mental health and faith communities. Today's topic for Episode 1 of Season 2 is responding to mental health challenges in the church. That's a topic that doesn't get as much conversation as it should, but today we're going to try to do something about that. As a part of a disclaimer for our podcast, this podcast is not meant to be professional advice, nor is it a substitute for seeking out mental health professionals. Please contact a professional therapist if you have mental health concerns. If you have crisis, you're in the middle of a crisis, I encourage you to dial pound 988. Okay, let's kick off. Why the topic? Well, responding to mental health challenges in the church is something that is near and dear to my heart because church spaces are sacred spaces. Faith communities, ministries, churches, however you define that, are the spaces that are set aside for people to be vulnerably available in their spiritual spaces, but also to seek to find support and community. And because faith communities are there to create safe space for others, it's more important than ever that people are able to authentically show up in those spaces and still find a sense of support. Our faith communities are meant to be collective. They are collective spaces for us to seek God or to seek our higher being. Therefore, it means that everyone has a piece of the puzzle. Everyone gets an opportunity to come together in that collective, the greater collective, if you will, to seek together. Our safe spaces should allow us to be our authentic selves while we seek God. Unfortunately, so many people hide what their struggles are, what their challenges are in faith communities, either out of fear of being judged or someone might assume that their faith is not strong, and sometimes simply because others don't know how to interact with them. And so hopefully our faith spaces can become authentic spaces where people can seek God with others being themselves. Lastly, I hope that our faith communities reflect God. And that means that it is an open space for all of our brothers and sisters who are seekers or who are walking the path of faith in a particular direction can find that this is a reflection of how God would walk alongside. That everyone that's struggling, whether your struggle is a physical ailment, a mental ailment, maybe it's a relationship ailment, it could be grief. Whatever your struggle is, that we all, each of us, brothers and sisters, reflect how God would walk alongside someone else. Everyone who is a part of a faith community in some way is seeking a sense of belonging. And because we are all seeking this journey of belonging, how more important is it that we make sure that those who are struggling amongst us have a sense of belonging? Church is for everyone. Faith community is for everyone. When we are open to all, then we find a space for all. And so I'd like to use that as a framework to talk about today's topic, responding to mental health challenges in the church. For those of you who are just joining us, maybe you don't know about my background. I'm an ordained Baptist minister. I've been an associate pastor. I'm a chaplain. I'm a licensed therapist. I myself have directed 2 church-based counseling centers for 5 years each, so for over a decade. And in my work of leading and integrating faith and church spaces, I find it very important that we begin to work on our mindset about how we make others feel a part of, feel welcome, feel belonging. And so each podcast, we have a guiding question. Today, the guiding question is, how could faith communities be intentional in their response to someone facing mental health challenges? And that intentionality is the part that's key, because we all respond in some way when we encounter a situation with someone facing challenges. But the question is, what is our intentional response as a faith community? I'm going to present perhaps some thoughts, just a framework, not necessarily a step by step, a point by point, but basically some words or some thoughts that might help us to guide that intentionality in our faith spaces. So first, I'd like to kind of talk about an axiom that tends to resonate with me when I talk to churches about mental health. And that comes from pastoral theologian Emmanuel Larte in his seminal book, In Living Color. He uses this axiom. He talks about the fact that in some ways, every human is like all other humans, like some other humans, and in some way, like no other human. That is such a poignant, powerful reflection to me, because what it says to me is that if it were not for the grace of God, I may face the challenges that others face. And therefore, I have no space of other for them. It is just that this is not the challenge that God put before me in this moment. And so therefore, I'm like all others in that I could have the same challenges in this world that anyone else faces. I'm like some others in that I do share some challenges that some others face. And in some ways, I feel like I am the only one. I am like no other, where there are certain challenges that I face individually. And so as I use that as a framework, it helps to shape how I see values, how I see beliefs, how customs come into play, and how my assumptions affect how I interact with others. I believe if I can keep that at the forefront of my mind, then that helps me see that when I see my brother or sister who's facing a challenge, particularly a mental health challenge, that I not look at them as other. I not look at them as something I can't comprehend, I can't understand, and I definitely don't look at them as though something is wrong with them. I recognize that the challenge they face just happens to be different than the one I'm facing in this moment. And so, as a framework, I do like to look at the concept of humanity leading the way in how we consider and create intentional response to deal with mental health challenge. So let me put a point there and go, what do I mean by mental health challenges? Well, in the course of any faith community, you're going to face the challenges that humanity faces in general. Statistics say that 1 in 4 persons, 1 in 4 humans, 1 in 4 Americans, whatever context you're in, will face a mental health challenge at some point in their life. That could be anxiety, that could be depression, that could be suicidality, that could be a personality disorder, a developmental disorder. There's several different disorders. As a matter of fact, there are over 300 disorders that exist that fall under the category of a mental health disorder. And so there could be a number of different challenges that someone is facing. And once again, we put that in the framework of just because I'm not facing that challenge in this moment doesn't mean that I can't equally be there for my sister and brother and have a compassionate response. So the first thing I want to talk about is leading with love. So what does that mean? Our approach to someone that's struggling in this way is important. How we approach someone. Historically, if you look back hundreds of years ago and even back to early biblical days, When someone had an unexplained illness, be it a mental health illness and sometimes a physical illness, oftentimes that illness was equated with sin. There was sin in that person's life. There was sin in that person's family. Perhaps a parent had sinned or an ancestor had sinned, and therefore their ailment was attached to sin. What I do believe God is beginning to show us in these modern days is that not every ailment is related to a spiritual reason. In other words, it doesn't mean that our spirituality doesn't play a significant role in who we are, but it does mean that if I have a headache, maybe I had too much salt today. If I'm hurting, maybe there's something aching in my body. In other words, God has allowed humans, God has allowed physicians, God has allowed mental health professionals to learn and train and be better helpers to those who are having an illness, a dis-ease, so that we may find ways to treat and help people to navigate through those. And so one of the things that Leading with Love says is that I recognize that this is a dis-ease for you. You are not well in this moment. And so I'm going to treat it with the same respect that I would treat if you had a cancer diagnosis, if perhaps one of your limbs was hurting. I am going to treat you with the same respect that I would treat anyone else who is facing a significant illness. I think one of the things that's happened in recent decades is that physical ailments sometimes get more compassionate response than mental health ailments, because there still is this lagging thought that if you have a mental health illness, that somehow is a spiritual battle versus perhaps the chemical imbalance that it may likely be related to. Many mental health issues, those that come on suddenly and those who you have across a lifetime, those illnesses could be, a part of your genetics and how your genetic makeup was composed. It could be the fact that perhaps you're having a chemical imbalance in that moment. It could be an experience that you've had. There's several different factors that could contribute to having a mental health challenge. And I think it's important for us, rather than to become detectives of what caused the challenge, it's more important that we lead with love in how we respond to that person, how we see that person, and how we see their role in our community. And so, first of all, I think when I think of how can faith communities be intentional, first, choose to lead with love. If you have someone with a developmental disability, how do you help in your community? What's your intentionality to make sure that that person feels like they are a part of, that they belong? There is space for them to seek God with everyone else. If you have someone who's going through an acute crisis, if you have someone that's facing depression, rather than negate it, rather than minimize it, what is your intentional approach to support that person, to walk alongside them, to perhaps refer them to a therapist, refer them to crisis care if it's needed? What is your intentional approach? And that matters. The next thing I would say, promote an inclusive ministry mindset. It's important for the leaders of the church to have a mindset to care for others, but it's also really important that the entire faith community promote a mindset of inclusivity, that we are all a part of the body of God, and not just in word, but in deed, in action. What is it that we do to meet those who are facing challenges head on? What do we do intentionally to make sure that this person doesn't suffer in silence alone somewhere because they feel that their faith community won't understand or won't respect the challenges that they're facing? What do we do so that we promote that everyone is welcome here? Everyone has a seat at this table. This is God's table. We don't get an opportunity to say, no, you can't come in, or you need to go get that fixed someplace else and not here. What is it that we do as a faith community that will promote this is God's inclusive table for all to come? There are things that I may not be able to help you with, but I will seek God with you for God's journey for you. Journey toward healing. What does that look like? I will seek God with you and walk alongside you in that journey. Healing may take different forms. Healing may not always be immediate. Healing may be a process journey. Some struggles are with us for a lifetime. And if that's a part of God's plan, how do I help you walk with God in community along this journey? The last thing that I would say as a major point that would help us be intentional in our faith communities is compassionate response. So sometimes in the course of someone existing in community, they have an episode. They have an acute situation where something changes, something needs immediate attention. What I think is important is beforehand, if faith communities are intentional to come up with plans, come up with processes and procedures that allow a compassionate response for what those crises look like. What does that mean? Well, that may mean if someone talks to you about ending their life or that they don't know how they're going to make it forward and how they feel hopeless. Yes, you will pray for them, but you also have a list of therapists. You also have some crisis hotline numbers. You also have people who can literally walk or drive them to where they need to get to and stay with them so that they hand them off to someone that can help them navigate through the feelings that they're struggling with. That we don't just take our hands off of it and we don't minimize what they're going through. A compassionate response may also look like for someone who is struggling with reality, that we connect them to somebody that needs help. Who could help them. Someone who's trained in that area to help them. Not that we try to convince them that they're not experiencing what they're experiencing, but that we try to get them connected once again to a resource that will help. But beforehand, we've already thought through what those types of resources might be, and we've developed a plan. Sometimes it's all of a sudden, what if someone is so overwhelmed that they can't get out of bed at their house? They've stopped coming to faith community, but someone recognizes that they're absent. Do we have a plan in place to reach out to say, hey, I notice it seems like you're withdrawing. I notice that somehow it seems like, you're isolating yourself. We want to be community for you. How can we do that? Here are some ways in the past that we've tried to be there for others. Maybe, there aren't things that you can think of that we can do, but maybe we can offer some suggestions so that you're not walking this journey alone. There are ways that we can be intentional in developing a compassionate response to those who are facing mental health challenges. And I think one of the things that's most important for us all across faith is that we're being intentional in the way that we're leading with love, in the way that we are promoting an inclusive space, the way that we are being compassionate toward others, and that means caring for them in their time of suffering. It means being concerned with them in their time of suffering. As long as we're beginning to do those things, I believe that intentionality will make a world of difference to someone who is struggling or who is facing challenges, who is concerned that their faith community might not understand and might not care what they're going through. Unfortunately, so many people isolate themselves from the faith community when they begin to have mental health challenges. And it could be because of the stigma associated with being honest about having a mental health challenge. It could be from previous teachings or experiences with faith communities that have been discouraging or hurtful in their response to mental health challenges. Regardless of what people are bringing, let us make the intentional choice to be different. Let us lean in to being God's space for others. How is it that we can reflect who God is in the spaces of community that others exist in? This podcast really, as you can tell, it comes from a place of love. It comes from a place of passion, making sure that all of God's children get a space where they can belong and they can feel like they belong. There, but for the grace of God, go I. I'd like to leave you and let you know that Solace Counseling and Consulting, which is my practice, my mental health practice, it integrates theology and psychology. It is available for counseling, for consultation. Sometimes church leaders want to consult with someone else about, well, how do I start making sure that we're addressing these issues? Maybe there's an individual in a church who's like, I want to take up this mantle. I want to make sure that my faith community is addressing mental health concerns, and I'm not quite sure where to start. I want to talk about consultation, or I just want some advice. In those things, I say reach out to us. The website is www.seeksolacenow.com. That's seeksolacenow.com. I'd be happy to reach out and connect with you, connect with your ministry, so that we can talk through ways that churches can be more intentional. We also offer training services. The counseling practice offers over 40 different training topics. The training topic that we're leading with right now is church leader mental health response training, where I have a 3-hour training where I will come into churches, train your staff and your leaders about compassionate response and about understanding how to triage mental health crises and challenges that your members may face, or perhaps you face when you go out and encounter the community. And so all of those are available in the trainings, also found on the website, seeksolacenow.com/church training. Look that information up and reach out, and we'd be happy to talk to you about that. This podcast is just getting started. I'm so looking forward to this season. This is episode 1. Episode 2 is loading. I already have our next guest lined up. It's Dr. Winetta Wimberly, who will come and talk to us next. She has a wealth of knowledge, in particular around clergy couples, clergy care, and clergy who face depression. And so that's going to be our next podcast episode. Make sure you are liking, you are subscribing, you're tuning in. We're on YouTube. We're on all your major podcast platforms. I thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for plugging in. If you haven't caught our first season, go back and catch our first 7 episodes. I hope that you are getting something from this podcast. Drop us a comment, drop us a note. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate your viewership. Take care of yourself, be well, and God bless.
Check out Dr. Glenn's new journal series titled Brain Dump Journals for the Busy, available on Amazon. Visit our websites for more information at thetheotherapist.com or catriceglenn.com.